Hi guys, it's Michelle, and today's video is going to be all about the game show killer. This is one of those true crime cases that makes me just simply never want to go outside again. So the story is probably, like I said, one of the just craziest true crime cases that I've heard in a while. But before we get into it, I would like to thank Acorn TV for sponsoring today's video. So Acorn TV is home to sophisticated and artful storytelling rooted in British television, which, if you know anything about me, love, I love England. I love being a British accent, but you guys sometimes don't like it. Their entire library includes hard-to-find gems, timeless classics, and newly discovered favorites from Britain, Ireland, Australia, and more. And with Acorn TV, you get premium commercial-free international content for $5.99 a month, which is honestly pretty iconic. And I love Acorn TV because I think it's fun when there's British versions of like American shows or shows that we have in America, like Law and Order, but like the UK version. Like, that's just honestly very exciting for me. And Acorn TV works on all of your devices. You can download the app or go online via Android, Apple devices, Amazon Fire TV, Google Chromecast, Roku, and more. And you'll never run out of content because Acorn TV has new releases every Monday, which is honestly great because I love binging TV shows, especially like during Corona time, and also like when it's cold outside, I kind of just don't want to be outside. So honestly, Acorn TV is perfect for that. So if you want to try Acorn TV out, you can get a 30-day free trial. Go to acorn.tv and use the code Michelle Platti. Definitely go check them out. It'll be really fun if we all just got into the British humor, which I feel like everyone kind of is these days, really liking the British content. So definitely go check them out. Thank you again to Acorn TV for sponsoring this video. So let's get into it. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the game show killer. The dating game killer, like I said, is a very crazy case. Events of like how this all played out, how they ended up on a dating show, like we're going to talk about that. But I'm going to give a quick content warning because this case involves sexual assault and obviously murder as well. So just giving you a warning for that. The story follows a man named Rodney James Alcala. He was born on August 23rd, 1943 in San Antonio, Texas. So Rodney Alcala ended up becoming one of the most notorious and just narcissistic, absolutely crazy serial killers of all time. Probably one of the craziest that I maybe have ever researched. I would say he kind of gives off Charles Manson vibes. Charles Manson had people kill people for him. He gives the same kind of like narcissistic vibe, but also kind of Ted Bundy energy. So Rodney Alcala grew up in a pretty normal home. He and his family lived in San Antonio until 1951 when his father relocated all of his family to Mexico. His father abandoned them when he was at the age of 11 years old in 1954. In 1954, him, his mother, and his two sisters relocated to suburban Los Angeles. In 1961, at the age of 17 years old, he joined the army as a clerk. Kind of had like a little bit of a breakdown while he was in the army. He like completely went AWOL and he hitchhiked all the way from Fort Bragg to his home in Los Angeles. And he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder by a military psychiatrist. He was discharged on medical grounds. But he's been later and continuously diagnosed with several different things, primarily narcissistic personality disorder, which I feel like explains a lot of his, not his behavior. I'm not saying everyone that's a narcissist is a serial killer, but a lot of the way that he does things, you're gonna see a narcissistic tendency really like come into play. He's also been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He had several other diagnoses in his life, but I would say definitely the most prominent one that people talk about the most was certainly his narcissism. So after leaving the army, he started going to UCLA. He studied photography here. Why did I act like I'm in UCLA? He studied photography at UCLA, and that was kind of like his way to like lure people in, was saying that he was a photographer, because he was, and that he like wanted to take pictures of people for his portfolio. Let's keep in mind, it was the 70s. I feel like things were just like kind of different and people would just like not be sketched out by a stranger being like, hey, I want to take your picture. So in 1968, Rodney Alcala committed his first known crime. Thankfully, an eyewitness in Los Angeles noticed that Rodney Alcala was luring in an 8-year-old into his car. This girl was named Tali Shapiro and she lived in Los Angeles. Eyewitness person thought that this obviously looked strange, but he wasn't quite sure if there was like something malicious going on or if the 8-year-old knew Rodney. So he ended up deciding to follow the car, which when the car led to Rodney Alcala's Hollywood apartment, this was when the eyewitness was like, something's not right, and he decided to call the police. So the scene when the police got there was just absolutely horrific and terrible. This 8-year-old little girl had been raped raped and beaten with a steel bar, and she was barely alive. Policeman noticed that she was breathing, so instead of trying to catch Rodney Alcala, he made the decision to try to help the little girl, and she ended up surviving. And I just think it was pretty crazy to see her like talk in this like 2020 interview. My mom saw this show on 2020, which is why she wanted me to make a video about it. But it is pretty interesting to be able to see her talk about like the situation. She was in a coma for like several days, but ended up being okay. Thankfully, that police officer made the decision to help her instead of trying to catch Rodney. But of course, this meant that Rodney got away, which is very unfortunate. Even though Rodney Alcala got away, the police ended up being able to figure out who this man was based on the items in his apartment, which ended up making there be a warrant for his arrest. To avoid the arrest warrant, he decided to leave California and drive to New York City. He enrolled in NYU Film School under the name of John Berger, which is confusing to me because I mean, maybe it was way different in the 60s and 70s, but how the hell do you get into school? An application? Do you just like enroll? Like, it was different because like NYU is like a big deal school. So like, I don't understand how he got in. With a fake name too. I guess maybe they didn't even look up your like social security number or anything, which is kind of freaky to think that that was like a thing. In June of 1971, a 23-year-old flight attendant named Cornelia Crilly was found raped and strangled in her Manhattan apartment. And later this crime was connected to Rodney Alcala. This next part is like one of the creepiest parts of like just the weirdness of the story and how it all came together. Probably besides like the dating show thing, which we'll get to. But in the summer of 1971, he became a camp counselor in New Hampshire at an art camp for children, which is just obviously really scary, obviously knowing everything that he's done. He again went under the name John Berger, for some reason spelled differently. But at this point, the FBI had added Rodney Alcala to their top 10 like most wanted list. A few months later, 2 children who had attended the camp were at the post office and they saw this like fugitive list and they were like, that's John Berger, like the camp counselor. So they ended up telling another counselor and the counselor was like, okay, don't tell anyone, like I'll handle it. And this was when Rodney Alcala ended up getting arrested. He was arrested and sent back to California, but at this point, Tella Shapiro and her family had completely relocated to Mexico, and her parents basically refused to let her testify as a witness, which not having that like first-hand witness statement made the charge so much less than what it was, because obviously it was rape, it was attempted murder, it was a lot of terrible things that probably would have put him in jail for a very long time. The prosecutors had to permit Alcala to only plead guilty to a lesser charge of assault. So this gave him less than 2 years in prison, and he was let out for good behavior, which is ridiculous. His parole boards determined that he had demonstrated evidence of rehabilitation. Once again, crazy. So he was basically out on parole. 2 months later, he got arrested for forcing a 13-year-old to smoke marijuana with him. Luckily, the police caught them because I can't even imagine what could have happened if they didn't. Told this girl, Julie J, which is what she's like referred to as in the court cases, that he was going to like drive her to school, and she started getting like nervous when he passed the school. She wanted to like get out of the car, and then he took her and made her smoke marijuana with him. That's when the police like caught them. He went to jail for 2 years for that. And in 1977, after his second release, his Los Angeles parole officer, for some reason, thought, you know what, you're allowed to go to New York City, that's fine. Even though Rodney Alcala was a repeat offender and he also was like on like a flight risk, but the parole officer still allowed Rodney Alcala to travel to New York City. So NYPD cold case investigators now believe that Rodney Alcala murdered 23-year-old Ellen Jane, who was the daughter of the owner of a really popular nightclub in Hollywood called Zero's. Her remains were found buried on the grounds of the Rockefeller estate in Westchester County. The connection between Rodney Alcala and Ellen Jane was made because she had a calendar in her apartment, and on the day that she went missing, she had like penciled in John Berger. Rodney Alcala was of course asked about this, and he claimed that he had, you know, met up with her to take pictures of her and that he dropped her off and then never saw her again. Rodney Alcala used this, you know, narrative of him being a photographer very frequently. He convinced several people to, you know, be photographed by him, and he had this portfolio where he took pictures of a bunch of different people, but a lot of these pictures were sexually explicit, of like young women and some teenage boys and girls. One time he like showed it to his coworkers because he ended up working at the LA Times later, and the coworker thought it was weird, but like she said that she was like kind of young, so she didn't really know, like, you know, she just thought he was like a weird guy, but she didn't like really think anything of it. Hundreds of people were photographed by Rodney Alcala, and so many of these photographs still remain unidentified to this day. And a lot of police worried that some of these people in these photos are victims of different cold cases or missing person cases, you know, across the country. Or in 1978, and this is when Rodney Alcala became a contestant on the game show The Dating Game. Really creepy to watch now, obviously, like knowing everything that he did. It was one of those dating shows where like there's like 3 contestants, and you know, the Bachelorette, like she like wants to talk to each 3 of them, and she chooses to pick a date at the end. And she ended up picking Rodney Alcala as her date.
Number 1, would you say hello to Cheryl, please? We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl. Okay. And who gets the dates?
Well, I like bananas, so I'll take 1.
Number 1. That's your number 1. All right. Well, there they go. However, you did leave 1 remaining. And this is your date. And I want to tell you something about him, Cheryl. He's a skydiver, so he's got a lot of nerve. He's into motorcycling. He's also a fine photographer. Say hello to Rodney Alcala. Rodney, come on and say hello. Congratulations.
But when she met him, like for the first time, because obviously it's like usually like that like blind wall thing, she just got weird vibes from him. She said that he was creepy, so she decided to not go out with him. I think that Alcala killed at least 3 women after his dating show appearance. Widely believed that this kind of rejection that he got like kind of lit a fire in him and made him really angry, because people who are, first of all, serial killers, but also people who are narcissists, like usually don't understand like the concept of rejection like that. So it's believed that he did not fare well with this rejection. Rodney Alcala raped and killed other women as well. These are the women who were able to like actually be connected to Rodney Alcala. Jill Barcombe, who was a 19-year-old girl from New York City. She was visiting Los Angeles at the time. Georgia Wixt, who was 27 years old from Malibu. Charlotte Lamb, who was 31 years old from Los Angeles, and Jill Parento, who was 21 years old from Burbank, California. So these cases were like cold cases, and they were later able to be connected to Rodney Alcala. So we're going to talk about the part of this case that really, you know, finally got Alcala in jail to be there for the rest of his life. On June 20th of 1979, a 12-year-old named Robin Samso and her friend were walking around Huntington Beach when a man, Rodney Alcala, came up to them and asked them to take their pictures. He was like, oh, I'm a photographer, like, do you want to come in my car and I'll like take your pictures or whatever. And luckily, like, the friend stepped in and was like, no, like, we're not going with you, like, bye, whatever. They went back to Robin's friend's house. Robin had a ballet lesson, and her friend was just like, you can take my bike. So that's how she was going to her ballet lesson. But somewhere on the way from her friend's house to her ballet lesson, Rodney Alcala ended up abducting and murdering her. With the help of the friend who was with Robin, she was able to help the police make up a sketch, and the police knew immediately that this was Rodney Alcala. They, you know, tried to bring him down for questioning, tried to figure out what happened. He claimed that he was never even in Huntington Beach. Obviously that wasn't true. And eventually, after doing a search in Rodney Alcala's mother's Monterey Park home, they ended up finding a receipt to a storage unit that was in Seattle, Washington. The storage unit ended up having a bunch of different like little trinkets and things that were belongings of the victims. In the storage unit, there was also Robin's earrings. That was like a very obviously big piece of evidence. It ended up contributing to his trial. So Alcala was arrested in 1979. He was held without bail, and in 1980 was the time for his trial. Robin Samso's mother actually brought a gun to this trial and was going to shoot him, like she was going to kill Rodney Alcala, but in her head she heard Robin's voice saying don't do it, so she decided not to. But Rodney Alcala was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of Robin Samso. The verdict ended up being overturned and a second trial needed to happen because the jurors were improperly informed about the different crimes that Rodney had committed. Therefore, in 1986, I feel so bad for like the family. They had to go through a second trial 6 years later. And again, Rodney Alcala was convicted and sentenced to death. And in 2003, more victims had been officially connected to Rodney Alcala, and he was charged for their deaths as well. And this was when he was charged for the deaths of Jill Barcombe, Georgia Wicks, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parento. He was convicted of that in 2010. So like I said, this has been a very long process. He was convicted, obviously, like I said, in 1980, but then again in 1986 and again in 2010. It's just been going on for quite some time. It might still go on because basically in 2010, the police decided to release some of the photos that were taken by Rodney Alcala in hopes to identify some of the people in the photos to see, you know, if they're okay, if they're alive, or if they are victims of different cold cases or missing persons cases. But none of the photos were connected until 2013. A family member recognized Christine Thornton's photo and they immediately, you know, noticed because Christine had been missing since 1977, and it ended up being her body that was found in 1982 in Wyoming. Her body was officially identified in 2015. She was 6 months pregnant at the time, which is just so sad, and it was just so creepy that he would take pictures of people before he killed them, and it's just so heartbreaking and just honestly a really scary serial killer. Like, I mean, all serial killers are scary, but something about his like narcissistic tendencies were so creepy and just so scary. Like the way that he like literally went on a dating show is insane. He would prop up the bodies in like a specific way, which is like common for a lot of serial killers to do because they almost like want to get caught. It's just so terrible, and I just think it's crazy and so damn creepy. The game show thing, just like, that's so scary, and luckily that girl felt creepy vibes from him, and luckily she ended up being okay. And Rodney Alcala is still living. He remains in the California State Prison, so he continues to rot in the California State Prison, and he's 77 years old. He's not doing well in the health department, so that's good. That is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about this true crime case. Like I said before, I just feel like it's one of those cases where I'm just like, I'm gonna simply not go outside anymore. Yeah, that is it. Thank you again to Acorn TV for sponsoring today's video. Like I said, if you guys want to get a 30-day free trial, go to acorn.tv and use the code Michelle Platti. That is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram because I'm always posting really dope ass shit on there. Subscribe for new videos every week, and I will see you guys later. Bye!